Good morning. Good morning. Hope you had a great weekend. So I want to ask you a question. We're going to get right into it here. What are you committed to? In fact, I want you to write that question down, but write it in first person. What am I committed to? Take the time to write that down. If you're taking notes this morning, write it down. What am I committed to? If you've got electronic device, even your phone, whatever you're using this morning, type it down or type it in if you don't have something to write it down with. But write down that question. What am I committed to? I think it's an important question that we should ask ourselves often. And I think that for most people in life, the average person, they rarely, if ever, ask themselves that question. And here's why I'm suggesting that we take the time to ask that question. The reason I believe that you should ask yourself that question is because I believe that nothing shapes our lives more than the commitments that we make. And I believe that those commitments are either going to build us up or they're going to tear us down. And either way, whatever those commitments are, they will define who we are. So one of the things that I'm challenging you to do is to really ask yourself what you're committed to. So write down that question again. What am I committed to? You know, this weekend I had the occasion to go to Las Vegas and signed up for this. It was called a ghost tour on the Strip, and they took us to like 7 different stations along the Strip, talking about the history of Las Vegas relative to the mob and suicide, murder, just all sort of crazy things that have happened in Las Vegas since really its inception. And one of the stories they told was the story of Bugsy Siegel and the Flamingo Hotel. And I didn't know this, but the Flamingo Hotel, I guess, was for all intents and purposes the first major hotel casino in Las Vegas. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it was built in 1949. What is interesting and notable about it is, at least for this conversation, is that the Flamingo was built by a mobster by the name of Bugsy Siegel. Some of you probably know that name. Really, the reason that name is famous is because Bugsy Siegel was very prominent in the mafia and had moved from the East Coast to Las Vegas and had built the Flamingo Hotel. The problem was that he had built the Flamingo Hotel with money that he had stolen from the mafia. And when the mafia discovered that, of course, they came out looking for Bugsy Siegel. And eventually he was found. In fact, he was murdered in his home in Beverly Hills. Now, the reason I share that story with you is because I go back to the question that I asked you: what are you committed to? And more specifically, you know, what legacy do you want to live and to leave? You know, you think about Bugsy Siegel and the legacy that he left. It was one of deception. It was one of being engaged in illegal activity. And ultimately, the reason people remember him is because he was a thief and he was murdered in his home for being a thief. Now, look, none of us is that. But the question, again, that I want you to just ask yourself is, what are you committed to? What legacy do you want to leave? You know, and I was thinking about the story of Bugsy Siegel and his legacy. It reminded me of another mobster, at least a person who was involved with the mob, a gentleman by the name of Easy Eddie, or at least that was the name that he was given by his boss, Al Capone. And if you know Al Capone, you know the name in history, a very fabled, storied name. The guy was the head mobster in the Chicago Mafia, a very brutal, mean man, a guy who oversaw racketeering, prostitution, bootlegging, murder on the streets of Chicago. Al Capone was infamous, a bad dude. Well, the guy who worked for him that kept him out of prison and kept him, quote unquote, clean was his attorney by the name of Easy Eddie, given the name Easy Eddie because he was exceptional at his job and he made it look easy keeping Al Capone for years out of prison. Easy Eddie was so good at what he did, Al Capone paid him exceptionally well. But aside from the money that he was given by Al Capone and the mafia, he was given downtown Chicago an estate that occupied an entire Chicago block. It was that large. His entire estate occupied an entire block downtown Chicago. It was walled in. He had security detail. He had in-house servants, and he was living the high life because he was there to protect Al Capone, and he did an exceptional job of that. And as good as he was at his job and as successful as he still wasn't satisfied. You know, he had a soft spot for his son, his young son. And he thought about his son and the life that his son was going to live. And at one point, Easy Eddie realized that he was living a life that was not emblematic of the legacy that he wanted to leave his young son. He wanted to leave his young son a good name and a reputation that was better than the one that he had as being the chief defender of the most infamous guy, a murderer in Chicago. And so he had a choice if he was going to continue to be that hero for the mafia and Al Capone and live that life of luxury in this huge estate under the protection of the mafia. And he could have done that and likely gotten away with it. And yet he chose not to do that for the reasons that he had this soft spot for his son and wanted to live a better life, to be a better example, and to leave his son a better legacy. He chose to go to the authorities, turn himself in and tell the story, to give all the information to the federal government so that they could indict Al Capone and charge him with all the crimes that he was guilty of. And in fact, that's exactly what he did. He turned himself in and gave all the evidence that he had to the authorities. Well, the good news is, at least in part, it did bring Al Capone down. The bad news is that a year later, on a cold, lonely Chicago street, Easy Eddie was shot multiple times and killed. And he was found with a crucifix, a rosary, a St. Christopher, and then there was a poem that they found in his breast pocket. And I want to read this poem to you because I think it's very telling, and it's certainly consistent with the conversation we're having this morning. It read this: "The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when the hands will stop. At late or early hour, now is the only time you own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no faith in time, for the clock may soon be still." And I suppose his message is, understand that time is fleeting and we don't have forever on this earth. And really, what are you committed to? You know, he talks about toil. He talks about what are you committed to? And it's the reason I asked the question, what are you committed to? You know, what do you want your legacy to be? It's a really important question. It's the thing that I believe defines the average person from the extraordinary person. Somebody who ultimately can identify, this is what I want my life to be about. At the end of days, that if I did this, if I committed to these things, if these were the things that define me, that I know that I lived an exceptional life. I lived the life that I was intended to live. See, and I think most people don't take the time to really ask that question. What am I committed to? What are the guiding principles? What life do I want to create? What legacy do I want to leave for my children and for the people that I impacted? Now, having shared that story with you, I want to share a different story. And I think you'll like this. It has a fun surprise. So World War II created a bunch of heroes. And, you know, the generation that fought that war is called the greatest generation, and I think for good reason. But one of the heroes that it produced was a gentleman known as Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. Now, Butch O'Hare was a fighter pilot on the USS Lexington, the aircraft carrier, which was stationed in the South Pacific during World War II. And his job was to fly a plane and run sorties to bomb and dogfight the enemy. And on one particular scheduled sortie, his squadron and he were supposed to go out and find the Japanese target and bomb it. Well, on the way to the target, he realized that his fuel tank had not been topped off, and he did not have enough fuel to get to the destination and get back. And as much as he insisted that he stay with his squadron and risk the fact that he was likely not going to be able to return, his he insisted, and his squadron leader said, "No, you're not doing that. Go back to the aircraft carrier and just sit this one out." So reluctantly, that's what he did. Now, as luck would have it, on his way back, he ran into a Japanese squadron. And that squadron, the direction that was heading, the trajectory was headed straight towards the Lexington. Now, he wasn't certain whether they knew the Lexington was there or it was just by chance that they happened to be heading that direction. But he knew, Butch O'Hare, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, knew that he had to do whatever it was within his power to make certain that he stopped that Japanese squadron from coming upon the USS Lexington and bombing it, because there was no squadron to dispatch to defend the Lexington. They were gone. It was his squadron that was long gone. The only thing that really stood between the Lexington and the Japanese squadron, the enemy, was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. And so he took it upon himself to attack the entire squadron, the Japanese squadron. And there he was with his 50 caliber gun, just surprise attacking this squadron and letting that 50 caliber gun just blaze. And for several minutes, he attacked multiple planes. And eventually he ran out of ammunition in his gun. Well, his attack didn't stop there. He then decided that what he was going to do was to basically dive after the enemy planes in hopes of clipping their rear tail wing or one of their side wings to disable the plane, to either cause them to crash or to turn back from wherever they came. And that's exactly what he did. The phenomenal thing is this, that this Japanese squadron was in such disarray and surprised by the audacity of this one plane that was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. They scattered off in another direction opposite of the USS Lexington. At that point, Butch O'Hare returned to his aircraft carrier and told the story of coming upon the Japanese squadron. Now, there was no reason for them not to believe, because fortunately his plane was fitted with a camera. And as they went back and watched the film told that very story that he had told. And in fact, based upon what they saw on the film and what he had told them, they verified that he had either shot down or disabled and caused to crash 5 enemy planes in that one act of heroism. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Now, unfortunately, a year later, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare was killed in action in a dogfight. The cool thing is that he was the first Navy pilot to win the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he was also the first naval flying ace. Now, he was from Chicago, and he was Chicago's favorite son during the war. And so when it was discovered that he had lost his life defending his country and being a great example for the city of Chicago, the city of Chicago eventually decided to name their airport after him. So if you've ever been to O'Hare Airport, know that it was named after Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, who acted on that day and in many days serving his country with great heroism. Now, why do I share that story with you? The reason I share that story with you is because that story relates to the first story that I told you about Easy Eddie. Easy Eddie, the defender of the mobster and of Al Capone, was the father of Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. Butch O'Hare was the son of Easy Eddie. Now, I think that's a cool story. It's a great story because there was that defining moment in the life of Easy Eddie, who had a soft spot for his son, and he had to decide whether he was going to become a great example and leave a great legacy for his son, his family, or he was going to continue to live in the lap of luxury and sacrifice that potential to be a great example and to leave a legacy that would not only impact his son, but impact millions. Well, fortunately, that's what he chose to do. He chose to take the route that he did, and it left a great impression upon the young man, Butch O'Hare, his son. So I have some questions that I want to ask you. Again, what are you absolutely committed to? What do you want your life to be about? I know those seem like, maybe like throwaway questions, but they're serious questions. What do you want your life to be about? What legacy do you want to leave? You know, you don't have to be an infamous or famous or wealthy individual to leave a legacy. We all leave a legacy. We all do, in one way or another. And my question for you is, what legacy do you want to leave? What difference do you want to make? Are you going to make a difference? And what difference? And to what extent? And whose lives will you impact? Here's a question that I want you to write down. I want you to write down this question, because as we start the planning for the new year, as we work to finish this year strong, I want you to ask yourself this question. How will I know that my life is on track? How will I know that my life is on track? I think it's a very powerful question. How will I know that my life is on track? You know, it goes back to the statement that I made in the very beginning about commitment, that nothing shapes our lives more than the commitments that we make. See, those commitments are either going to build us up or they're going to tear us down. But either way, they define who we are. So how will you know that your life is on track? What are your mile markers? What are the things that you say that if these things happen, if this is what my life is about, if this is what it looks like, then I know that my life is on track, that I'm getting the right outcome? How will you know that you're on track? You know, I had the occasion this weekend to have a conversation with a gentleman who grew up in South Africa. And, you know, we were just talking about the world and about present day, what's going on in this country, but also what was going on in his country as he was growing up. The guy's 40 years old, and he grew up in apartheid. He grew up where there was legalized segregation and racism at the hands of the Afrikaner government in South Africa. And it was so interesting to hear his perspective on what's going in this country today in the United States, and what he experienced as a young man, as a kid, and then as a young man. But the reason I mention his story, his name is Wesley, is because we really talked about this idea of commitment and legacy. And we started to have the conversation about Nelson Mandela. And as you might imagine, as a young man who was an ethnic minority, who lived under apartheid, a segregationist, racist regime, he was very supportive of Nelson Mandela and very grateful. And you could see a great deal of emotion as he told the story about Nelson Mandela. And he told one story that I wasn't aware of. He shared this story, and I don't remember exactly what they called it, but I'm going to say it as I remember it. But it was basically a committee on truth and justice. It was something like that. And basically, the responsibility of this committee that was headed by Nelson Mandela was to give an opportunity to the white leaders, the Afrikaners, who had for years supported, propped up apartheid, to give them an opportunity to admit to their crimes, because there were many crimes committed by that government, and to publicly renounce their crimes and to renounce apartheid. And as I recall, I don't hold me to this, but this is what I recall, that the committee went on for, I want to say, a couple of years, I believe, and had seen hundreds of people come and admit to their crimes and renounce their crimes. And I think to the number, every one of them tearfully and genuinely. And what is interesting is, to the number, every one of those people who came and admitted their crimes and renounced apartheid were pardoned by Nelson Mandela. It's interesting. They were pardoned by Nelson Mandela, a man who spent 27 years in prison standing against apartheid. And yet, at the end of the fall of apartheid, a man who was then thrusted into power, and Nelson Mandela was control of the entire country, had the decency to simply say to those who had oppressed and murdered and otherwise harmed the ethnic majority in that country, he offered them forgiveness. And it's the reason that books have been written and movies have been made and documentaries about Nelson Mandela, because of the commitments that he made, that he had. You know, I believe that our commitments aren't what we say they are, but they're rather what we do. Whether it's Easy Eddie or Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare or Nelson Mandela, you can see in each one of those cases, it's obvious what their commitments were. We don't need to be told what they were. Their stories tell us what their commitments were. See, I believe that our commitments are not what we say we are, but they're rather what we do. But what I'm asking you to do is to this morning, and to often do this, to have this conversation with yourself about what am I committed to take it from a subconscious level to a conscious level and really get clear about what it is that's most important to you, to really structure on a conscious level a clarity about what it is that ultimately is most important to you in your life and what you would like your life to be about. I'll just finish with this thought. Gosh, it's been probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that, between 7 and 8 years, where George, Rob, and I had the honor and the privilege and the unfortunate circumstance of going and visiting one of our great agents, Jeff Lighton, at the hospital. Jeff was suffering from and fighting pancreatic cancer. And if you know anything about pancreatic cancer, it has a very, very, very low survival rate. I think it's in like 2%. Well, Jeff was battling it, and it looked like there was a possibility that they were going to conduct some surgery. And if the surgery were successful, meaning that he survived the surgery, because it was a very dangerous surgery, that there was a good chance that he could survive maybe 3, 4, 5 years or more. And as we stood there in the room looking at Jeff, who still had this countenance, just such a kind man. He was so kind and a good man, a big man from England, big bear paws, you know, just this, you shake his hand, and I've never felt a man's hand bigger than his hands, but a very kind man. And I remember George asking him, because we were having a conversation, and I remember Jeff asking us, well, what advice do you have for me as I lay here in this bed, and I'm going to go, under the knife, I'm going to have this surgery tomorrow. And George looked at him and he said, you know what, I'm not going to even get into that. I'd say, that is not my position right here. He said, I'm more interested in understanding what advice you would give these 3 young men. I think, as I recall George saying, these 3 young whippersnappers. And Jeff looked at both of us, and he, as Jeff often would do, as he contemplated, he kind of stretched back and he put his big hands behind his head, and he kind of looked up, in great thought, and he said, "You know what?" He said, "As I look back at my life," he said, "I just wish that I would have learned more and loved more." Which is ironic, because those of you who had the occasion to know Jeff, he was very inquisitive. He was a very intelligent man, lived a very successful life, worked for, as I believe, Johnson & Johnson for many years as a very successful executive, and then got into real estate and did very well there. A very educated man, very bright man, very kind man, and a very loving man. I think about some of the most impactful conversations in my journey of transitioning from being just a real estate agent broker to an owner who was leading and coaching people in this company, this organization. Some of the most important conversations I had were with Jeff. It makes me emotional thinking about it. The reason I share that story with you is this, because Jeff left a legacy, one of kindness and love. And what was ironic is that on what was ultimately his deathbed, he said that he wished that he had done more of that. And of course, all 3 of us, exclaimed and said to him, "Jeff, you have lived that life. That is who you are." So I go back to the question again: what are you absolutely committed to? What do you want your life to be about? What do you want your legacy to be? You know, as we talk about real estate and success and all the things that we want, yeah, that's all very important, but it runs deeper than that. See, if we're going to live a successful life financially, you know, we're going to have the success that we want in real estate, we're going to have to foundationally figure out and understand and be clear about what we ultimately want our life to be about. Because your life, my life, is not about real estate. That is not the thing that is most important to us. And it's not even the money that we can generate. It's ultimately at that deep-seated emotional core level, what do we want our life to be about? So whatever you can do to set aside the time to answer that question, to get really clear about that. What I know is this, that the clearer you are about that, you know, they say with clarity there is power. I believe in that. The more clear you get about what you want your life to be about, and get the sort of clarity that, say, an Easy Eddie finally got, and a Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, or a Nelson Mandela, or a Jeff Lighton, that if you can get that sort of clarity about what you want your life to be about, you can live a storied life, a life that is worth living. Man, we're all given this gift to be on this planet, to choose what we want to do when we want to do it, to really define and write the story. So what's your story going to be? What story will people tell about you after you have passed, after you have left your legacy? What will your legacy be? All right, guys and gals, appreciate your time this morning. As always, have a great week. Tomorrow is election day. The only thing that I would say about that, if you have not done it, go out and vote. And not only is it a privilege, but I believe it's a responsibility. It's the thing that makes this country great, that we have the ability, the right, the freedom, the privilege to vote for our leaders in this democratic republic. So go out and do your civic duty and vote tomorrow. All right, let's finish it up with some